any questions, please use the Q&A panel, the question and answer panel, and reserve the chat panel for any technical questions you may have. If your audio goes out or if you're having any difficulty, that way Soraya Shalash, she's going to manage the chat panel, and she's kind of our master of Zoom. That's her official title, given by me just now. Anyway, she will manage any of the technical difficulties that you have, or do her best. And we will be monitoring the question and answer to answer any of your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel. We have today Dawn Harlow, who is the Chief Financial Officer for Kentucky League of Cities. Many of you will be familiar with Dawn. And we have also asked Katie Schaller-Ward. She is the CFO in Bowling Green and also the Assistant City Manager. And she's been kind enough to volunteer to help us with the panel. And Erin Ballou, am I saying that right, Erin? Sorry, I butcher names. Who is the Assistant CFO for Bowling Green. So to start us off, we have a few polls for you. If Soraya can go ahead and launch our polls, just kind of an icebreaker. I think, there we go. So that poll is live. If y'all can go ahead and let us know what you had to eat for lunch today. Panelists, you can't vote. We're not in on the fun. I know, sad. Okay. So most everybody had other. I had a piece of sourdough bread, so I'm sure most everybody's lunch is a little better than mine. And then I think we had one more question, Soraya, didn't we? There we go. This one's a little more substantive, or not, as the case may be. Okay, and Soraya, Nancy Howard has indicated that she didn't see the polls, so I don't know if you can help her. But basically, we're just kind of trying to get a feel for who all is on the call. We have the majority, city clerk, treasurer, 37%. And we have a pretty wide range of participants, CFOs, city administrators and managers, mayors, council members and commissioners, and others. So that's good news. We know that everyone here is involved in the budgeting process. And at this time, I was going to ask, and I probably should have done this first, the panelists to kind of go ahead and talk a little bit about their role in the budgeting process. And I don't know, Katie, if you wouldn't mind kind of starting out.
Sure. My role as the Assistant City Manager and the Chief Financial Officer is essentially to take the lead on the budget process. I lay out the calendar for it every year. I set up all the meetings and schedule everything that goes on in the budget process. We do a kickoff usually in January, make sure that we schedule our Board of Commissioners annual strategic goal planning session. But I oversee all of the budget process, and very much heavily involved in the expenditure side of the budget as well as the revenue side. Erin Ballou is also involved in the process. She's one of our Assistant Chief Financial Officers. And then we have a second Assistant Chief Financial Officer, Sean Weeks, who covers most of the revenue side for the budget. And Erin and I both work on the expenditure side. I probably focus more on personnel, and she focuses more on the regular line items.
Okay, that's great. And then Erin, do you want to expand on that at all, or?
Also, in addition to that, Katie mentioned I spend a lot of time on the expenditure side. I also serve on our budget team, which is myself, Katie, our other assistant chief financial officer, the city manager, and the HR director. So we meet with all the departments and review their requests, and then we sort of go from there and progress the budget along the way. I also spend a lot of time putting together the official budget document. We participate in the GFOA Distinguished Budget Award. So we've been awarded that for the last several years. So we spend a lot of time each year trying to put together the budget in a nice sort of large package for the public.
That's great. And then Dawn, I know what you do. You spend a lot of your time teaching me how to budget, but aside from
Oh, thank you. And first of all, welcome to everyone, and to thank Katie and Aaron and Morgan for helping us navigate through the webinar today. At KLC, as the CFO, I do so many of the similar things that Katie and Aaron have mentioned, oversee all the budget process for all of our entities, all the revenue and the expenditure items. We build our budget, like many of you, from the bottom up. And so we meet with the individual departments and we get their input on the budget. And then that is ultimately going to our executive team and to our board, which then functions similar to how your authority would oversee your budget and approve it. So as these are unknown times, everybody's having a lot of questions. So that's what kind of led to the webinar today. And so with that, Morgan, I'm going to toss it back to you.
Great. We have our first question from Mayor Black in LaGrange. He was wondering how much is your annual operating budget in Bowling Green?
Our operating budget is somewhere around 65 to 69 million. And that's our general fund operating budget. When we include capital, it's probably closer to 72 million.
Great. And I'm going to go ahead. Soraya, would you put up the poll about COLAs? This is one of the questions that we had is, are any cities already working on or planning on doing a cost of living adjustment for the upcoming budget? Or is this something that is kind of so far out of your purview or your ability right now that you're just not even thinking about COLAs and just kind of treading water? So if you guys could answer the poll, hopefully everyone can see these now. Okay. And most cities, well, we actually have about half of the cities on here are not considering COLA increases at all, and others, it's kind of a varying level of increase. I don't know, Katie and Aaron, do y'all want to talk about the COLAs and how that's factoring into your current numbers? Or
We are looking at using the Department for Local Government COLA, the 2.3%. We're currently looking at that. We're estimating costs. For our budget is probably going to run somewhere around $830,000 for our general fund. So we haven't implemented that yet. We haven't made a final decision of whether or not we're going to be able to afford it. But we are looking at that number, and if we do a COLA, that would be obviously the top end that we would ever do. But if it comes to a point where we can't afford the full 2.3%, we might come up with a 1%, maybe do a one-time payment. We'd have different options that we could utilize with that.
okay. And this is a really good question. These are some questions that our panelists submitted to us in case, just to kind of prime y'all to see what kind of questions you have. How are y'all budgeting for revenues? no real change to property tax. But what are you doing with trying to project occupational and net profits, revenues, and the like?
That's probably the biggest question of the hour. You know, we're all probably going to be looking at this differently. We don't have really any experience with this kind of pandemic and the impacts that we've had with all the unemployment. So we are going back and looking at what history we do have with the former Great Recession that we had back in 2008, 2009. Ours lasted from 2008 to 2012. So we've got some data that we were looking at, trying to compare how that might fit into what we're looking at right now. Of course, that we sort of eased into that. Governments were sort of behind the curve on that impact. Whereas now with, you know, if you are reliant on your withholdings and net profits, which Bowling Green, 70% of our revenue budget is withholdings and net profits. Then obviously unemployment, small businesses closing, industries being affected, all of those things are going to impact our particular revenue projections moving forward. So we're trying to put together probably multiple scenarios and come up with our best guess in terms of where we think we might be going into the next fiscal year.
And is that consistent with the recommendations y'all have seen from GFAO?
Yes, and even the Kentucky City County Managers Association had a conference call Tuesday, which was very informative and very specific to local governments. And a recording of that particular presentation is on our website for the KCCMA. I think it's .org. I apologize, I don't have that in front of me. But there is a recording there in the handouts on our website from that call. And it specifically talked about the impacts to local government that this particular recession and pandemic are having, and then some avenues and some different ways that you could look at some county impacts, not so much local government, but to look at the county impacts. And so there are a lot of different things. I've been on every webinar, every conference call, everything that we have found that other, you know, agencies are putting out there, other associations, just to learn as much as we can and hear what everybody else is hearing about the economy and the impacts going forward. We certainly hope that this is a short-term recession, but we don't have the answer to that. With the fact that the governor has pushed back the withholdings deadline now to July. Ordinarily, you would have it April 15th. Although we're getting some of those trickling in now, a lot of companies will probably wait until July and or extend even to the October extension deadline. So we're trying to figure out how is that going to impact us? How are we going to close out the end of this fiscal year before we go into the next fiscal year?
And we have our first question. This is kind of a mix of legal, but if y'all have dealt with this already, please feel free to jump in. And this is from Kim Blue in Madisonville. Municipal road aid public hearing. How should we do that if we're going to have a city council meeting virtually? And what we've been recommending is there is language in Senate Bill 150 that kind of addresses the public hearing process. So you can still conduct this virtually, and you can use Zoom meeting and go to Facebook Live and allow input from that perspective. What some other cities have been doing is using this format, the Zoom webinar, or I think GoToMeetings has another package with a webinar option that would allow participation just like y'all are participating with a webinar basis, so that you could have the virtual meeting, you could have it live streaming online, and then you could allow comment through the question and answer. So for example, the reason we're asking y'all to put these in the Q&A box is that we actually receive a hard copy of the questions in the question and answer box after the meeting. So we'll get an email of all the questions that have been asked, and we go through these after the fact to make sure that we really answered everybody's questions. However, if you do it in the chat function, we don't get a copy of them to make sure we answered everything. So it's more helpful for our correspondence with y'all. But I know that that is an option for the municipal road aid public hearings. And I don't know, Katie, if you or Aaron have dealt with those yet.
We have not done those public hearings. We've done a community development block grant public hearing. I believe it was a week ago, and we used, we don't use Zoom. We have a different system called Life Size, but very similar in concept. So that's what we did.
And did that allow for public comment as well?
Yes.
Okay. So it's called Life Size?
Yes.
Okay, great. So there are still, I guess the takeaway from that, there are still virtual options, even if you're doing your meetings virtually, that allow for public comment and allow that interaction to meet the requirements under, like Katie was saying, under the block grants or municipal road aid hearings. From Mayor Black in LaGrange, we hear about possible aid for cities and counties that KLC and KCO is lobbying Congress for. If cities were to eventually expect to get stimulus money or aid, what exactly would cities be listing as items to get help with? At this time, I really don't think that I'm out any money other than for some PPE equipment, compensation, occupational tax will be taking a hit. And honestly, Mayor Black, we're not sure what it would look like. Right now, we're hoping for some payroll relief, and Dawn, you may be able to speak to this better than I can, as far as what we're trying to help cities get. We're hoping for some relief for utilities. Our municipal utilities have been hit really hard, and like I said, the payroll. Dawn, did you?
Right. Well, it's still an unknown, and so I know that JD and Brianna are working diligently on that. So we don't have any updates or specifics today, but as soon as we do, we'll make sure that we send those out.
So, and then Soraya, would you mind putting up the polls about furloughs and layoffs? Okay, so this is another question that our panelists wanted to kind of gauge how many cities are doing furloughs, and we have another one specific to layoffs. Okay, so this is consistent with what I've heard. Most cities are not really doing furloughs, and if they are, they're doing them kind of on a limited basis. And a furlough is generally when there's a reduction in the number of hours during the week. So for example, let's say I would come in Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday through Friday, I would not work and not get paid. And layoffs are generally more final. Something along they're akin to a termination, but their employment relationship continues, and there is a possibility of someone coming back to work, depending upon how that is done. So, sorry, there we go, the layoffs question. So we do have some cities doing layoffs. And I know that we've had, thank you, Sarah, for doing that. We've had a lot of questions about layoffs and furloughs based upon need. As an aside, Joseph Coleman, who's on here, he's put some information a link to the KCCMA page that Katie was referring to that contains the recording for the revenue discussion she mentioned. He's put that in the webinar chat, and he also put information about the coronavirus relief fund. So for Mayor Black, that may help you see currently what's being offered through the relief fund, and hopefully will give you an idea of what might be available in the future. And there's a question, there have been some cautions that open sharing of a Zoom meeting can allow Zoom bombing. And I'll take that one. There are some concerns. There are some security measures that you can put in place. We have those in place for our meetings and for our webinars, and we haven't had an issue yet. From our perspective, it's not as concerning when you're dealing with adults as it is in some of the issues with the schools and those situations. We also don't have any of our members who are providing any information that could be stolen or used in any harmful manner by this tool. And so we think that that it's safe for everyone to use this platform, or we wouldn't be doing it at all. And then another question, are agencies moving forward with budget preparations, or are they waiting until after July 1 to create budgets? And statutorily, even though the budget is supposed to be passed, we do have a provision. If the city does not pass a budget, if they can't come to an agreement, they can operate off the previous year's budget. And some cities are taking that approach because they're either not having meetings or the speculative budget process. And Katie and Aaron, I don't know if y'all want to talk about how Bowling Green has weighed the pros and cons of each approach.
Well, I can tell you we're certainly not on our normal schedule. We would normally present our budget to the Board of Commissioners on the third Tuesday of May. We are pushing that back. We will probably not present the budget until June. We wanted to wait until we got our April withholding numbers in. We have monthly and quarterly withholding payments. Majority of it is monthly. So we wanted to at least see how the month of April has been affected. For us, the month of March was not terribly affected. So we really wanted to get a better picture of how April's impact had on our withholdings before we made a final decision in putting our revenues together, and then make the very final decisions on the rest of the expenditure side of the budget. So we're planning to still meet the statutory guideline and get the Board of Commissioners a copy of the budget before June 1st, but it'll be probably right at the line, and then do our presentation probably that first week of June, and then hopefully still have a budget approved before the end of the month.
And we know now our budget for next year, our revenues will be scaled back compared to what they are for this current fiscal year. So we know going forward, our revenues and then expenditures will have to meet that as well. So it wouldn't be good for us to roll forward our budget, because we know our revenue budget is going to be so much less.
That's a very good point. See, Soraya, would you mind launching the next poll about occupational tax revenue? I feel like we should have music playing or something while they're doing the poll. Okay. So it's kind of all over the board what the cities are expecting with the decreased revenue, but most, and I've heard the number 12 to 15%, but I know that some cities are seeing a lot more, and that's hard. Is this consistent with what y'all are projecting?
I think so. We're still in the process of trying to get those projection numbers together in those different scenarios, but we probably will range anywhere from the 10 to 25% range. We're really hoping it won't be what we consider a doomsday sort of scenario at the 25%, but we certainly are going to look at those numbers and see what the impacts are.
Oh, wow. And then, Soraya, will you launch the next one about reserves for revenue shortfalls too? So I thought this was a really good question. And one of the panelists sent me some questions as I was saying, and one of the questions was, how can municipalities use rainy day funds, and what types of reserves are you going to use? And that was kind of the question is, you know, how many cities have reserves, much less the ability to use them. And I don't see the poll, but I don't know, Katie and Aaron, if y'all want to talk about that a little bit, and Dawn too. I mean, what are the factors that you're considering and whether to use these?
I'll let Aaron take this one.
We do keep a sort of a rainy day fund. We considered our committed fund balance in our general funds. So that would be available to us to use to maybe bridge that gap between our revenue budget and expenditure budget for the next fiscal year. Right now, our plan is to not touch that. We want to try to avoid using that rainy day fund. But if we were to use that, we do have sort of a guideline in place where we would have to go through the Board of Commissioners. I believe it would be an ordinance or municipal order, and make it official that we were using this. And we would also, at that time where we would use it, make a plan to pay it back, whether it be over the course of 1 or 2 fiscal years, and how we would plan to get that money back to bring our rainy day balance up to the level it was prior.
And then do you have your rainy day fund set as a prudent reserve by ordinance or just by policy, or how do you do that?
It's set by financial policies that we have. It's a 25% of our projected revenue budget.
Okay.
And actually, with our next fiscal year, since it's tied to our projected revenue budget, our rainy day fund will actually go down just a little bit next year, based on our revenues.
Then we have another question. If we have any city that owns utilities, are any of you using surplus funds from utilities to support their general fund? And if anyone has an answer to that, if you could kind of put that in the chat. I don't think, do y'all in Bowling Green? No, I didn't think you do that. And I've not heard of any cities having or projecting any surplus right now from their utilities. And it will depend on how your utility is structured as to whether that's even possible. So far the answer is no. No one is doing that I can see, but we'll see. Okay, so another really good question that you know, is near and dear to my heart because this was a KLC legislative initiative. How will the estimated savings due to the delay of CERS, the 12% increase, help you? And how are you going to be able to, you know, to account for that in your budget? And we're hoping that it helps you a lot. But Katie, I don't know if y'all want to.
I went through that calculation about a week or so ago once I heard the good news that we were freezing the rates for the fiscal year 20 rates. I calculated that it's nearly $1 million savings for our budget in the personnel lines. So obviously that savings means we don't have to cut $1 million somewhere else in order to meet our revenue budget. That's just a built-in reduction that we're going to take full advantage of.
Nice. And hopefully other cities are seeing this too. $1 million is a nice round number for y'all. What about capital projects? I hate this. I just saw Sarah's text asking me at the beginning of this if I was okay launching polls. So thank you, Soraya, for being our Vanna, because no, I'll have to figure that out another time. Would you mind launching the poll about capital projects for us? Oh, wow. A lot of people are moving forward with their capital projects. So this was a conversation that came up on another webinar about postponing capital projects and finding that as a source of revenue. Are y'all looking at that in Bowling Green?
We're looking at a lot of different options. We started back in probably 2008 during the last recession. We started trying to find a way to save for the future, for future capital projects. And so every year we tried to put money aside in a particular capital fund, or if we had a surplus at the end of the year or had underspending, we capture that and move it for a future capital project. So there are some road projects that we started probably about 2 or 3 years ago, and we still have a couple more years yet to get those road projects done. So we've pre-saved for those. So we will more than likely budget for those capital projects. We don't typically like to issue debt if we don't have to. So we try to pay cash as much as we can, but we save for multiple years, or we pre-fund over a period of time before we actually move forward on a capital project. But there are some in the works that we have already pre-saved for, so we'll probably move forward on those. But there'll probably be very few capital projects in our general fund. Almost all of those would be capital projects where we've already moved the money to a capital project fund.
You know, and that's one of the questions that we've had about the capital projects is, what if we've already put these out for bid? Or what if we put something out for bid and now we're not going to have a meeting to accept bids? How do we handle this? If the capital projects are not moving forward, there are going to be clauses in the contract language that are going to allow cities to postpone or even cancel contracts that they've already entered into. And I know this has been a concern for some of the cities, and even in postponing bid receipts, if you can't open them, there's language in Senate Bill 150 that postpones any of the deadlines that are necessary going forward, and in the governor's executive order that postpones any deadlines that would require an in-person meeting. That doesn't necessarily mean that people who have submitted a bid are going to be able to adhere to the bid that they've submitted. So what we're encouraging cities to do is to work with their vendors, work with your contractors, and you know, to kind of figure out, does something need to be rebid? How to approach these going forward? Have y'all had any of those issues in Bowling Green?
No, not currently. We had postponed once the back in March. We had a few bids that were out on our website for some construction projects, and we went ahead and withdrew those. But we have since had a few other bids that have moved forward. They were time-sensitive bids we were going to get federal or grant state funding for, so we went ahead and moved forward on those. Fortunately, we had already done a pre-approval with our Board of Commissioners on one of those that allowed us to move forward with that construction contract once the bids were open. And then when we were able to have our Board of Commissioners meeting, we went ahead and retroactively approved it again, just to cover our legal piece of all of that.
That's great. And then So just to make sure that everybody sees it, if you do look in the chat, which I keep telling you not to look at, Joseph has also put in there the fact that we're conducting a survey. KLC is doing a survey on potential budgetary impact and actions cities are taking that we've pushed out to y'all. It's on SurveyMonkey, and he has included that email in the chat as well. So trying to think. I don't know if y'all, Dawn, was there any other questions or anything that you've come across that you wanted to address?
I noticed earlier in the Q&A, I think Mayor Black had posted that he's going to be presenting a budget with a $600,000 loss. And so we have heard that there are many cities who are now faced with presenting budgets at losses. And so besides what we've talked about as far as personnel costs, delaying any contracts or capital improvements, what are some other areas or other expense items that cities are looking at that might be able to help?
One thing we've looked at in the past, whenever we went through this several years ago, is we sort of try to target our expenditure budgets to reduce instead of doing across the board cuts.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing we look at are sort of the more discretionary spending. And right now it's really easy to sort of cut back some of the travel budgets. There will be probably only in-state travel, I'd say, for a while. So that's one we've taken an easy look at. That one's an easier one to look at now. And even with our capital project budgets we were talking about earlier, we do plan to move forward with a lot of those, but we also need to prioritize, which ones are, more important to do now that will save us maintenance costs in the future if we go ahead and replace this equipment next year versus keeping a really expensive to repair truck for a few more years.
Right, and thank you, Erin, for that input. We have also really scaled back our travel. So I'm so glad you brought that up. We're seeing that a lot of conferences, as you all know, are going to be held virtually so that there won't be any travel. And even our in-state travel, we're starting to roll out a plan so that we can figure out when it's best to get back on the road. So we know that we'll be impacted by that. And some other things, we're seeing that meetings expenses and stuff, some meetings are just going to be canceled and not rescheduled. Or if we hold them virtually, we're going to not have the cost of the venue or certain items like that. So in the end, that might actually help with some expenditures.
Okay, we have another question. What is the GFOA Distinguished Budget Award that Erin mentioned? I think y'all are in competition this year.
Yeah, it is by the Government Finance Officers Association, the GFOA. They put forth pages of guidelines where you sort of tick off the boxes and you submit your budget document to them, and they go through and they sort of grade it and make sure you're doing everything they've asked of you, and you meet certain guidelines that are standardized across the entire nation, and I believe Canada as well. So it helps us know that our budget document meets the excellent range. And we've gotten this for the last several years. And we started with our previous budget document, then we looked at the guidelines that GFOA wanted you to have. So we just sort of made our document a little more robust.
And we also want to recognize that Erin is the president of the Kentucky GFOA chapter. And so, Erin, we appreciate you moving our Kentucky chapter forward.
And yeah, just a little plug, we're still very new and fresh. We had planned to have our first in-person training in March, which of course that did not happen. So if anyone is interested, hopefully as I know everyone is a little busier than usual in their offices right now. Hopefully we can start to get something out to our members soon. But if anyone's interested, you can look up kgfoa.org, Kentucky GFOA. We do have a website, or you can always email me if you have any questions.
And Aaron and I, we will be working with the other officers on putting together a future webinar for the Kentucky GFOA members. So anything that we can do there, we don't have some dates. I know that we're trying to work around some webinars that are currently scheduled. So stay tuned for future dates there.
Okay, and we have a great question from Joseph Coleman. What short-term financing options may be available to cities? The Federal Reserve announced the municipal liquidity facility, but rules have not yet been released. Since budgets will be hurt badly this quarter and must be balanced, what other cash flow options exist? And Dawn, this may be for you, or maybe we should have had Robin and Stephen Pekarsky on here as well.
Yes, I know that is something that Robin and Stephen are looking into. I know that they are still working on that. So we don't have any specifics at the moment. We're constantly looking for solutions so that we can help our cities with short-term financing options. Another thing as far as financing options that might be able to save some cities is look at your current debt that you have financed and see if it's a time to maybe get a lower interest rate. So you might be able to refinance some debt there, and that might be able to help in the long run in the budget as well.
Great. And, you know, one of the things that we have suggested to a few cities that are really struggling, I know that Stephen has been able to assist some cities in looking at their budgets and their revenue and finding maybe some areas where the cities could change some things, streamline some things, has found a little bit of lost revenue. Don't get excited because there's not a lot of lost revenue out there to find, but he's been able to help some cities who are really struggling. So that's another option if you want to contact he and Robin Miller. And they're doing a webinar here in a few weeks. I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but we will have it for you here shortly. Another question from Aaron Bowles is, are you looking at a 10 to 25% reduced revenue for the entire year or just the first quarter in fiscal year 21? He was calculating 30% reductions in the first quarter, but hoping to be back to normal for the remainder of fiscal year 21. Do y'all have any thoughts about that?
We're actually looking at when we get our April numbers in and we want to compare those to fiscal year 19 and see what the difference is. That might get us a starting point for a stair-stepped percentage reduction that we might do. So if the revenues between April of 2020 compared to April of 2019 are, say, a 30% reduction, then we probably would do a 30% reduction going into the next fiscal year for the first, probably for July, and then maybe stair step that to maybe a 5% reduction each month as we look into the year. That's something that the city of Hopkinsville is also considering. In fact, we got the idea from them, give them a plug. And so that we weren't looking for a complete cross the board reduction for the entire year, except we do know that our net profits, which would be due next April in 2021, will more than likely be impacted more significantly than the net profits this year, because those are based on, this year's net profits are based on a good economic year in 2019, whereas our 2020 economic year is more than likely going to be impacted by all these businesses not being able to have the productions that they would normally have in a year. So we expect that the net profits in April of 2021 will be impacted. So we'll do our best guess in that particular reduction. But I agree, I don't think we're looking at 10 or 20% across a 12-month span. we would just be looking at sort of stair-stepping that percentage by the months into the first few months of the new fiscal year.
Great. This is our first question on the PVA issue, and we haven't heard this a lot from our cities, but we have seen a few situations. An anonymous attendee, any indication if many cities are anticipating a change of property tax dates? We were told to anticipate a delay of certified rolls and information to the PVA, and could this push back dates for adopting property tax rates and the corresponding due dates? I don't know if you all want to talk about that.
We did get notice recently from our PVA here in Warren County that the tax roll will not be certified until July, probably late July. So more than likely that will push us back a little bit. We try to do our public hearing in August and then be able to have our tax invoices sent out in early October. So we anticipate there might be a 4-week delay. We're hoping it won't be any longer than that. So we might do a public hearing in September and then hopefully get our tax bills out by mid-October, at the latest early November. But at the moment, we're not expecting to change our deadline of December 31st. But that's obviously yet to be determined.
And that's really what we're hearing from my perspective, the legal office, when we get calls. That's really what we're hearing from cities, is that there might be a slight delay. They're not anticipating the delay to have a significant budgetary impact.
Right.
One thing I will add is that we have made some changes on the insurance payment options at KLC. Our board voted so that we could have a monthly payment plan put in place starting with August and taking it all the way through until June of next year, just because we had heard from so many cities that they may have delays in collecting their property taxes. And typically we had tried to schedule the payment plan arrangements around the timing of when property taxes came in. So we're trying to respond to the timing and trying to make things more affordable for cities. We're not going to have a payment plan fee charge that has been waived by the board also. So just let everyone know about that if you participate on the insurance program.
And that was huge when you told me that the other day. I was pretty excited for our cities there. Another anonymous attendee, any advice or suggestions to delay or not delay ABC renewal, given that many businesses may still be closed or reduced to carry out only for some bars and restaurants when licenses come due or will have only been reopened a short time? And I will tell you that we're relying on ABC to tell us. I know that they pushed back the renewal date previously, and I think, I know that the commissioner is keeping her finger on the pulse there. So my suspicion is that these will continue to be pushed back unless there's more of a consistent reopening. Hopefully, I know that the commissioner, ABC commissioner, has been very good at communicating regularly with our ABC administrators group. Almost lost that there for a sec. With our ABC administrators group. So if they're going to change these dates and push them out further, I would say that Bridget will hear something from Allison, the commissioner, and we'll get that information out to you soon. But I don't know I know a lot of our cities have pushed back collections of the ABC regulatory fee until July. And I don't know, Bowling Green, if y'all did that.
I know that we haven't sent anything out in terms of updates because we knew at this point, a lot of businesses probably won't be able to respond right now. Not all of our restaurants have remained open during this time period just for carry out or pickup. So we've been trying to be cautious and respectful of that fact and not try to pressure too much at this point. But we'll certainly follow whatever the state ABC directs.
Robert Martin, thanks you for the plug in Hopkinsville.
Yes.
Um,
I cannot take credit for that idea. It was a great idea, and it's his.
Robert has many great ideas.
Yes. Kim Blue asked if anyone is looking at doing a hiring or pay increase freeze. And I have heard about this from some cities, you know, recapturing some of the projected costs by, you know, doing a hiring freeze. I know Lexington did that. I think for them, it's a $6 million savings. I don't know if you've done that in Bowling Green at all.
We certainly did that in the past during the last recession. If it was a non-public safety position, we would hold that position vacant for a period of time. We filled all public safety positions that would come vacant as quickly as we could, but even that process is months long, so we would always have some savings during that process. But that is certainly something on the table that we'll be looking at. We've also contemplated presenting a budget, maybe being a little bit more conservative with that budget, but then have the opportunity later in the year, if we see revenues doing better than we anticipated, to amend our budget and maybe add a few things back. Maybe then at that point you can address some capital projects or some other items that you cut from your budget. So we're considering that as well. Depending on how our revenue projections fall, we wanted to have a lot of different options available for us to move forward.
Okay, Hodgenville has a hiring freeze and pay increase freeze, and they've cut all overtime. And that reminds me of another question that we've had about payroll taxes or occupational tax. We have had some questions about whether during this time when teachers have been working remotely and other workers have been working remotely, how this impacts potentially the payroll tax collection and the occupational tax collection. The statutes are pretty clear from our perspective. It doesn't change the fact that the employer needs to go ahead and collect those payroll taxes and those occupational taxes. The cities may want to consider any impact that requests from the employees themselves to get reimbursed for the days that they have worked in another city or outside of the city limits that may have on your budgets. And Katie, I don't know if y'all have looked at that at all.
We have looked at that. We have an interpretation that this is nothing other than considering an employee who might be on vacation, that it's still wherever their place of business is where they would ultimately be working had it not been for this pandemic and people working remotely. So it's our opinion at the moment, which obviously is always subject to change, but right now, even Jean Harmon, our city attorney, legal opinion is that we would not probably process those refunds.
I like that interpretation. We've kicked some things around here at KLC, and I think that what we would tell the cities is home rule all the way. We've had some judge executives who have been rather vocal that they don't think that people working outside the city limit should pay the payroll tax. But I do like your approach in Bowling Green. I'll have to call Jean later.
Yes.
And Tony says thank you. I know that I've been on the phone with Tony and Mayor Phelps a few times. So
we would certainly love for the governor to give that direction, but obviously, we'll interpret our legal opinion on that if we have to.
Yeah. So another Another question that has come up occasionally with employees has been how have you handled any remote work for your employees from a budgetary perspective? As far as if this continues, do you anticipate buying more laptops or making provisions for some of your employees to work remotely? Are you looking into any of that? I know we are internally, just in case. How is this affecting y'all's budget from that perspective?
We are fortunate. We already had quite a few iPads and Surface Pros and different things that we had recently started to implement for those who are out in the field. And all of our police officers had tough books in their vehicles. So we've been fortunate that many of our employees who are working remotely, who have that capability, we've been able to set them up. Some have personal laptops that we have turned into IT, and they've set up our VPN system where we could remote into our desktop through our own personal laptop. There's certain provisions and regulations and things that we obviously want employees to be respectful of if they're using their personal computer for city work. But we have allowed that, and we did a pretty big ramp up. In fact, we just replaced, I don't know how many there were, maybe 100 laptops, and then the tough books had just been replaced for the police department. So we were getting ready to put those in surplus for auction, and we ended up reissuing those. So we were fortunate on the timing of being able to reissue and keep those internally at this point while people are still working remotely.
That's great. And those tough books are expensive. So
Yes,
that's good that you were able to continue using them instead of surplusing them.
Yes.
That is great news, because we weren't in a position where we had surplus equipment, and so we placed several orders, and as many people else are experiencing, those are on back order.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So we're just going to continue to watch. And then one thing that we decided is, as employees within our office are due for a replacement of a desktop, we're now going to replace those with laptops, so that if we need to work remotely again at a second wave, a third wave, whatever, or it's just more flexible, then employees have a laptop to take home.
It's a great idea.
So we had a question that I haven't thought of and hadn't heard of, but it makes a lot of sense. Are other cities having to hire more help because the inmate program is on hold due to the pandemic? And I'm sure this is impacting our cities from a maintenance perspective in particular. Have you all been dealing with that at all?
We, a few years back, when they had done something with the Class D felons previously, we stopped using inmates for a lot of our maintenance. So that's not an impact to us right now, but I can see where some cities may have that, certainly.
It's particularly for seasonal help,
Yes.
for property maintenance on the outside of the building. Yeah,
Yes.
I can absolutely see that. And I guess we're not having a whole lot of other questions roll in. I don't know if there are any other issues that y'all are facing that you kind of want to throw out there.
I think we've covered most of it. We don't know, like everybody else, we don't have that crystal ball, and we can't look to the future. So we're just putting together our best guess in how we're going to be impacted going through. And the one benefit I think we all share is that we can amend our budgets, as we get into the new year. So if you find out that the revenues aren't producing what you thought they were, you can amend your budget and adjust things at that point. Or if you under budgeted and now you're seeing more revenues come in, you can adjust your budgets at that point too. Or just consider capturing that savings for a future need. If you don't currently have a reserve set up, that's a great opportunity to get one started.
And Katie mentioned reserves. Earlier, I forgot to mention that if we were going to tap our reserve, there's no way we'd ever use all of it. So, if we were going to bridge that gap between revenues and expenditures, we would never go all the way and take all of our reserves. You'd want to keep some in there in case, this happens again in 2 more years, or what if this lasts a lot longer than what we anticipate? So it would always be prudent if you do take reserves to make sure you have a balance left for you.
Very good points. And something else that we're hearing from some of our smaller cities who don't have large reserves built up is that they have money, and in their general fund, they're trying to project out cash flow. And so one thing that we're seeing is that now cash flow forecasting is more important than ever. And just break things down on a monthly basis. You may present a best case scenario and a worst case scenario, and things may fall somewhere in between. We don't know at the moment, but with that, I think that the more that we can do to look at cash on a monthly basis more closely and adjust to those forecasts, I think that will also help. Kind of see how much is left in the general fund to cover expenses. And then if you need any more help with that, then reach out to Morgan. Our great legal team can help with more questions about general fund and other expense appropriations.
So just kind of to summarize, what I'm hearing are suggestions of, if you're passing a budget on July 1, maybe be a little bit more conservative and be hopeful that you're going to be able to amend that in the coming quarters to reflect some increased revenue. But right now, everyone's just being fairly conservative in their revenue projections and how you're going to operate the city moving forward. Oh, we do have a question. Kim Blue from Madisonville, should you have a reserve of 66 days or how many days of working funds? So I guess she's asking, in your reserve, how many days are you usually kind of reserving your cash for? I said that very poorly. In your prudent reserve, how many operational days of the city are you trying to fund in your prudent reserve?
I don't know that we've ever looked at it in terms of days specifically. However, I think we probably have up to a 60-day coverage with our 25%. We do a flat percentage base, so it's a 25% of our revenues. So ideally, that would get us through a 90-day period if everything went perfectly. But as revenues ebb and flow, and you'll have a big chunk of revenues come in at the property tax season and maybe a chunk more during withholdings, but not everything happens exactly quarterly as you want it to.
And that's where the cash flow tracking Dawn was talking about comes in. So you would know our debt service payments really hit in, say, May and October. So you need to make sure you have plenty of cash to pay those payments, and then you start to build up in the other months.
Okay, well, just to kind of conclude, I want to thank all of our cities. We really appreciate everything y'all are doing, and we know how hard this is. And we thank you for your dedication, for your public service. And if there's anything any of us can do to help, please let us know. I especially want to shout out to Joseph and to Soraya, who have been a great help during this webinar. Please, any of y'all who can complete the survey in the chat for our government relations section, please do. And somebody, an anonymous attendee said, lucky me, 20 years of learning from the bright, generous, and ever patient Katie Schaller Ward. Thanks, Katie, Aaron, and KLC. Katie, I think you have a fan, maybe. I mean, we're all your fans.
Yeah. Katie fans.
But thank you all very much for participating in this webinar. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to call or email me, mpatterson@klc.org. All of our information's on the website. If you haven't questions for Katie or Aaron, I will be happy to throw them under the bus and send you their email as well. And Dawn as well. I do that to her plenty. So if y'all don't have any other questions, just thank you for your participation, and thank you so much to the panelists.
Yes, Katie and Aaron, thank you so much. You've made this successful and we appreciate your insight. Thanks so much.
Yes.
Glad to do it.
Thank you.
All right.